Draco Malfoy in the year when everyone suddenly paid attention to him. By Draco will hear about this. Chapter 7. To Jump or Not to Jump. They all went home for the holidays the next morning, their traveling arrangements slightly more awkward than usual due to the circumstances. Draco was sharing a compartment with Hermione, far away from where they had seen Harry and Weasley board the train at Hogsmeade Station. For the first part of the ride, Hermione ranted at him about Weasley, McLaggen, Brown, and then Weasley again, before finally she turned her shrewd eyes on Draco and he knew the interrogation was going to start.
"So," she said in a would-be casual tone, "you and Harry seemed cozy last night."
Draco cleared his throat and looked out of the window as an excuse to not have to look at her.
"You'll have to tell me what happened eventually, Draco,"
she deadpanned.
"I will find out."
"Nothing much happened," Draco admitted, honest.
"Draco, I was there!"
Hermione pointed out, raising her eyebrows, clearly unimpressed with this reply.
"I saw you flirting from across the room."
"Yeah, all right," Draco conceded. "Okay, so that happened."
"Glad you're not trying to deny it."
"I'm not thick, Hermione."
"You have me wondering."
Draco glared at her. Hermione smiled a little too innocently.
"So,"
she asked, biting a lip,
"nothing else happened? I thought maybe he'd end up kissing you once you'd left the party, the way he looked at you."
Draco flushed and now he wanted to kick himself. Merlin's saddy pants. "I think he might have," he admitted, his voice strained. "There was a moment, but we got interrupted and I chickened out."
"What?"
Hermione asked, her eyes wide.
"Draco!
I didn't mean to!" Draco moaned. "I just heard someone and suddenly my body was moving away."
"You're an idiot!"
Hermione rolled her eyes, looking at him with despair.
"Why can't you just accept good things when they happen to you?"
"I'm trying," Draco protested. "It's not like I'm willfully sabotaging myself."
"Sometimes it feels like it,"
Hermione grumbles, shaking her head.
"Well, you have Christmas halls and close quarters with him now. I know you live at your aunt's place and he's at the Weasleys, but we all know you'll see each other constantly, so you'd better make the most of it. I want to hear no more stories about failed kisses when we next see each other."
"Yes, ma'am," Draco muttered, smiling a little when Hermione grinned at him.
"You're ridiculous," she told him fondly. "Both of you. I cannot wait for you to finally get over yourselves and become an item."
Draco bit his lip to rein on his smile, but he feared that it was a hopeless endeavor. Hermione had been right in saying that Draco was going to hang around the burrow constantly, though this did not mean that Harry and he did have a lot of alone time. When Weasley wasn't around, Ginny searched his company as a shield from phlegm, her loving nickname for her future sister-in-law, or Miss Weasley was fussing over them all. Though Harry did not cease looking at him in that new exhilarating mix of heat and tenderness that made goosebumps break out over Draco's skin underneath his warm clothing, so Draco knew that nothing was lost in any way or form yet. On the contrary, he could feel things building between them bit by bit with each shared glance, smile, and touch. Not everything was jolly well throughout this Christmas season, though. If anything, his cousin Dora's condition had worsened. Where she had made an effort to communicate with her family over the summer, she had now withdrawn completely, and it took Draco a couple of days to find the courage to even approach her, only to get completely shot down. She did not accompany Draco to the burrow on Christmas Eve, even though she, too, was invited. Draco thought, though, as he arrived at the crowded burrow around dinner time, that maybe it was better this way. The house was so crowded and noisy that a depressed Dora would have probably felt terribly overwhelmed.
"Draco!"
Ginny called, as she caught sight of him hooking her arm through his and leading him further into the house past the twins, who were currently needling a very red-faced Weasley.
"I told them about Lavender."
Jenny smirked, her eyes dancing in mirth.
"Payback is a bitch."
Draco laughed, shaking his head. "You should have censored Slytherin. I rest my case."
"Whatever you say,"
Ginny shrugged.
"Ah, look, here are Harry and Lupin."
They joined Harry and Draco's former favorite teacher in a far corner of the living room, deep in conversation, though Ginny was almost immediately called into the kitchen by her mother. Harry's eyes lightened up when Draco sat next to him, nudging his shoulder, and they exchanged a soft smile before Draco turned to greet Lupin. "How have you been?" he asked, critically scanning the way the man's cheeks seemed to have caved in since the last time he had seen him, and his skin appeared so pale it had a grayish tint. "Well," Lupin said airily, giving him a hollow smile. I've been better. I can see that, Draco frowned. What's going on? Is Dumbledore sending you on taxing missions? I've been living amongst my kind, Draco. Lupin sighed, making his former student flinch. I guess you can imagine that it hasn't exactly been pleasant. So you've been spying? Draco asked, gulping. Yes. Lupin smiled bitterly. As I just told Harry, most of them are on Voldemort's side. I figured, Draco muttered, frowning at him. Is it safe for you? I mean, your connections to Dumbledore are well known. Oh, I played up some anger about losing my job at Hogwarts. Lupin shrugged. It's not as difficult as you think. Most werewolves think they are mistreated by society at large. That's why they turn to Voldemort in hopes of a better future for them. Well, Draco conceded rather bitterly, it's not like you can really blame them, seeing how the Wizarding Society is currently treating them. We are really prejudiced. Yes, but they are terribly misled in thinking things will be easier under Voldemort's reign. Lupin rolled his eyes. Also, I commend your sense of social justice, Draco, but some of these people, they don't deserve your pity. His eyes grew hard then, and after a moment he told them in a very different kind of voice. I found the werewolf who turned me, for example. You did? Harry asked, perking up next to Draco. Yes, Lupin nodded. Fenrir Greyback. Draco drew in a sharp breath, recognizing the name immediately from the news and whispers amongst his parents. Harry, though, looked at them blankly. Who's Greyback? He asked. You haven't heard of him? Lupin raised his eyebrows, showing his surprise. Greyback is perhaps the most savage werewolf alive today. He regards it as his mission in life to bite and to contaminate as many people as possible. He wants to create enough werewolves to overcome the wizards. He specializes in children. Bite them young, he says, and raise them away from their parents. Raise them to hate normal wizards. I heard that Voldemort was using him to threaten people into obedience, so I knew he was working for him. Draco muttered, feeling sick. Yes, Lupin confirmed, his voice rough. Voldemort offers him prey in return for his services. He threatens to unleash him upon people's sons and daughters. It is a threat that usually produces good results. Draco could see it. His fingers twisted in his own trousers, knuckles white with tension. It appears my father offended him, Lupin proceeded to tell them, his eyes far away, and that's why he went after me. For revenge. That's sick, Harry muttered. I used to pity the wolf who'd bitten me, Lupin continued, not acknowledging Harry's words. I thought he'd had no control, knowing by then how it felt to transform. But Greyback is not like that. At the full moon he positions himself close to victims, ensuring that he is near enough to strike. He plans it all. There was a long silence between them. After a moment, though, Lupin smiled tiredly at them and caught Draco's gaze again. So, what have you been up to? Lupin asked. I heard from Harry that you're both Quidditch captains now, and I know that last year you were made prefect. An excellent choice, if you ask me. I'd say you're probably on your best way to head boy. Draco grinned, shaking his head. Come on, with a father in Azkaban? Draco deadpan, raising his eyebrows. And a best friend who causes destruction wherever he treats? Hey, Harry called indignantly, making Lupin chuckle. We all know Dumbledore doesn't care about these things, Lupin told him pointedly. As long as you and Hermione remain top of the year, I'm sure you'll be the best available candidates. Not to mention the strong message it would send to have a Slytherin-head boy with a convicted Death Eater father who turned his back and changed sides. I've heard something along those lines before, Draco muttered, making Lupin smile at him fondly. You've got influence, Draco, Lupin told him, not unkindly. The sooner you accept that, the better it is for our side during the war. Draco didn't know what to say to that, so he chose to remain silent. Thankfully, Miss Weasley chose that moment to call them into the kitchen for dinner. Dinner was a loud and cheerful affair, with everyone talking over each other and fighting for the food, and Draco found himself grinning all throughout it. And not only because Harry had chosen the seat next to him and kept throwing secret glances at him that he obviously thought Draco hadn't caught on to. Afterwards, they retired back to the living room for a nightcap, and Miss Weasley put on one of Celestina Warbag's annual Christmas concert on the wireless, making Draco cringe inwardly, though at least he was polite enough to keep his displeasure to himself, unlike Fleur. For a while, Draco and Harry chatted a little more with Professor Lupin, and then with Jenny, who had come to vent off her frustrations about Fleur and her brother, and then quite suddenly they found themselves alone on the couch, the rest of the family across the room in little groups, not paying any attention to them. "Well," Draco murmured, looking up at Harry through his eyelashes, and Harry smiled at him tentatively. "This has been a much more cheerful Christmas Eve than last year." "You could say that again." Harry grinned. "It's nice to have you nearby like this, you know. I could really get used to it." "I know," Draco chuckled. "After all these years of being stuck at the manor away from all the fun, it seems almost surreal that I could just pop in and see you anytime I want. It's even easier than in Hogwarts because there's no restriction on common rooms." "Yeah." Harry smiled, and it looked a little longing to Draco. He even leaned sideways into him, his warmth bleeding into Draco's side as he muttered, "I wished it were always like this." Draco's throat dried up a little, and he closed his eyes, willing his racing heart to calm down. In vain! Harry's body against his felt both agonizingly teasing as well as overwhelmingly good. He wanted to lean further into it, wanted Harry to wrap himself around him like a blanket and swallow him up in that heat. But maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to hold back anymore? At least not as absolutely as he had done all this time? Slowly, tentatively, Draco lowered his head sideways until it rested on Harry's shoulder. Harry tensed at the contact, and Draco gulped, but he didn't move. Neither did he open his eyes, too terrified to see Harry's expression. After a few beats, though, Harry relaxed again, and then he leaned his head against Draco's in a demonstration of yet unprecedented intimacy. Draco's heart soared. It wasn't like they hadn't been this close before, or even closer for that matter, but usually they did it for a reason, mostly to comfort each other. This, though, was different. This was enjoying each other's nearness just for the sake of it, and Draco felt like he was going to implode with sheer happiness. They jumped apart when the concert ended, and Fleur asked, "Is it over? Thank goodness! What an horrible—" Mr. Weasley quickly leapt up to interrupt her before she could infuriate Miss Weasley more, and Draco and Harry exchanged a sheepish smile, both flushed and embarrassed. As Draco bade his goodbyes to everyone and got ready to flew back to his aunt's, Ginny pulled him into a tight hug and muttered, "I saw you snuggling with Harry back there! Damn, Draco! Finally!" Draco grinned as he pulled away, thinking he'd already got his best Christmas present before the morning arrived. Draco spent Christmas Day with his own family. It was quite a different holiday than he was used to at the manor. Andromeda prepared a lovely meal with the tentative help of her sister, who was rather a beginner at cooking, and they all gathered around the kitchen table and had lively conversations almost reminiscent of the Burrow, only less chaotic. The only one who was so obviously not feeling the Christmas spirit that it was painful to watch was Dora. So when Andromeda and his mother were taking care of the dishes and Ted was preparing some eggnog for everyone, Draco slipped out onto the terrace after his cousin. Dora was leaning against the wall next to the back door, arms slung around herself to fend off the cold staring off into space. She looked so miserable that it clawed at Draco's heart. "Hey!" Draco sighed, positioning himself against the wall next to her, awkwardly kicking the frozen ground. "Not in the mood for Christmas?" "Nope," Dora said, puffing out the P in a way that made her point somehow even more vehement. She chewed her lip, and there was a moment of silence between them before she asked, "How was the Burrow?" "Nice," Draco replied quite honestly. "They missed you, though. Miss Weasley asked about you." "I wouldn't have been good company." Dora shrugged, but she was frowning. Then she asked very hesitantly, "Who was there?" "Well, most of the Weasleys, save Percy, plus Fleur, Harry, and Lupin. Remus?" she asked very softly, and something about her tone caught Draco's attention. "Did you speak to him?" "Yes," Draco nodded, watching her closely. Her face was guarded, but there was something in her eyes, something that Draco was far too familiar with. "He told us about his mission. It seems like he isn't having much of a good time." "Well, that's to be expected," she breathed. "This is no life for him." "It's not," Draco agreed. He was still watching her, and then he asked, very gently, "You like him, don't you?" "Pardon?" she asked, looking alarmed. What gave you... You have been distant and non-committal ever since I returned, and here I mention Lupin and you start showing interest? It's not arithmancy, Dora. She was silent for a long moment, looking so utterly miserable that it tore at Draco's heart. Have you told him? He asked. Of course I've told him, she burst out angrily. I've told him again and again. He's the one who insists that he's no good for me. That he's too old, too dangerous, too whatever. Like I care! Oh, Draco muttered, a little taken aback. I'm sorry, I had no idea. It's just... Dora groaned, rubbing at her eyes, and Draco saw with some alarm that they were glistening with tears she was desperately trying to hold back. I've tried, Tried to forget about him. I just can't. He's the one for me. Chest tight, Draco's eyes were drawn up towards the dark night sky, and he let out a deep sigh. I think that's a family curse, Draco muttered. Our kind tends to fall for one person and one person only, no matter how stupid of a chore they might be, and then we carry this love through our whole life. I mean, look at Andromeda. Look at Mother. Look at me. He did not say the words, but apparently they hung in the air loud enough for Dora to hear because she turned to look at him, a frown on her face. So, she prodded, who are you our silver tits for? Draco snorted, shaking his head. Interesting choice of words, he noted. Dora just raised her eyebrows. He sighed, contemplated, and then chose to be honest. Harry? Dora whistled. Well, she commented, I thought my heart had a death wish, but yours takes a cake. Thanks, Draco said, grimacing. Crap, that sounded... I didn't mean it like that. If anything, I think your chances with Harry are 1,000 times better than mine with Remus. Harry seems to really care for you, and he's only half as stubborn as Remus, I think. Though, to be fair, I don't know Harry as well. What I meant to say is... Dora, Draco interrupted her rambling with a smile. I know. Harry's the Dark Lord's most wanted. I realized that falling for him wasn't my most self-preserving move. Well, Dora offered her smile weak. As long as you know, Dora snorted. Have you ever told him? She asked, repeating his own question back to him. Not yet, Draco admitted. Until recently, I was very sure my feelings were one-sided. But that changed? Dora inquired, a small smile on her face. Yes, Draco smiled, biting his lip. I think it has. Well, I'm glad to hear it, Dora nodded. You should go for it. Enjoy the here and now. Things might be difficult in the future, but those feelings you have for each other shouldn't go to waste. You might regret it. Draco nodded, fully aware that she was now as well talking to herself, and despite his absence, to Lupin. When he next visited the Burrow, it was to hear that Percy had made an appearance at Christmas morning with the bloody Minister of Magic in tow, who had promptly taken the inverted pretext to invite Harry in a private conversation to become the Ministry's new poster boy. As Harry told Draco about it, up at Weasley's two-orange room while Weasley was having a loud fight in the corridor with Ginny, it was all Draco could do to not take his anger out on Weasley's belongings. What does he mean? It doesn't matter whether you're the chosen one or not. Draco hissed, his knuckles white as he clutched the pillow Harry used for sleeping, which he had been hugging when Harry had started talking. It matters a great deal if you're fighting to the death! Well, not to him, as long as I give the people hope and tell them what a great job the Ministry is doing. Harry rolled his eyes, but he was reaching out for Draco's hand, gently unclenching Draco's fingers. They were shaking as he let go of the pillow, dropping it into his lap. Oh, how nice for him! Draco sniped. Good on him being able to just not care! Right, Harry said softly, frowning at him. His hands had caught both of Draco's now, and he was holding them gently, his steadiness willing Draco's fingers to stop trembling. It's going to be fine, Draco. Draco knew that they weren't talking about Scrimgeour any more then, and he closed his eyes, trying to take even, calming breaths. Sometimes the fear of losing Harry still threatened to pull him under if he let it. He only opened his eyes when Harry lifted his left hand to his mouth and kissed Draco's fingers, ever so tenderly. Their eyes met, and those green orbs were blazing with unvoiced emotion so strong that it had Draco choking on his own heartbeat. They sat like that for a long moment, And then there were loud footsteps from the corridor, and Harry's eyes widened. He dropped Draco's hands and flushed, breaking their eye contact. "Blimey, Ginny's a menace!" Weasley snapped as he stomped into the room like the Neanderthal that he was, completely unaware of the tension between them. "You're a menace!" Draco muttered under his breath, but he took the opportunity to get to his feet. Weasley's presence was usually his cue to go elsewhere. Harry looked a little lost as he realized that very same thing, and Draco sent him an apologetic smile as he backed out of the door. He made his way down to Ginny's room, knocking perfunctorily before letting himself in. Ginny was fury cleaning her room, the content of her shelf scattered all over the floor, and Draco dodged all of her knickknacks to get to the bed and dropped down on it with a dramatic sigh. "Oh dear," she said, looking him up and down with a smile from where she was dusting off the empty shelf. "What's up with you?" "Can you die from the sheer amount of your feelings?" Draco asked her, and he might have even whined a little towards the end of the question, though he would not admit it outside of this room. "Oh, sweetie," she chuckled, fond now, as she carefully made her way over to him, almost stepping onto a miniature unicorn, and sat on the bed with him. "Normally I would say you can't, but with you and Harry, I won't rule anything out." "We had another moment," Draco muttered, staring at her blessedly white wall after the atrocity of her brother's room. "And then your kid of a brother walked in!" "One day I am going to murder him," Ginny noted, her eyes narrowed. "It will be entirely justified." "I might get there first!" "That would save me the problematic discussion with my parents later." Draco snorted, and Ginny reached out to brush his fringe from his face. "You need to stop dancing around each other," she said more seriously. "It's getting ridiculous, Draco. No, it's been ridiculous for about a year. We need a new word now, a word that hasn't been invented yet." "I'm trying," Draco muttered, "but I can't just grab him and kiss him." "And why the bloody hell not?" Ginny demanded. "Because," Draco called. "Because you're a repressed pureblood, that's why." Ginny rolled her eyes. "Well, I don't really blame you. We've had your mother over, and she's a nice woman and all, but while she's affectionate with you, she's not really warm-blooded. I can't imagine your parents being lovey-dovey in front of you." "Of course they weren't!" Draco called, appalled at the image. "That would have been strange!" "See?" Ginny said, pointing at his face. "You're totally repressed. I bet you've also beat yourself up over liking a boy at the beginning, thinking it was unnatural." When Draco didn't answer, she sighed, pinching his cheek. "Oh, Draco," she crooned. "You're too pure for this world." "Shut up!" Draco groaned, elbowing her so she'd stop. "I had a complicated childhood. We can all be glad I'm so well balanced, all in all." "No kidding," Ginny agreed, and she sounded actually sincere. "But honestly, stop beating yourself up. You like Harry. He likes you. There's nothing complicated about it. Just go for it!" Draco didn't answer, thinking that it was easy for her to say when she didn't feel what he felt. Harry and him were too important. There was no room for mistakes. He didn't want to mess anything up. Maybe she and Dean could just jump and see where they landed. But there was more at stake for him and Harry, and that was terrifying him.